been in a lot of wars, bub. The brave always die first.
X-Men 97 Episode 9 was intense, and that cliffhanger was absolutely insane. I mean, is Magneto gonna die? Is Wolverine gonna die? Is Ryan gonna die?
What?
And are we finally getting the long-awaited X-Men Avengers crossover that's been teased all season?
Well, if your hands are tied, you won't be needing this.
Welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and a little later I'm going to be joined by two X-Men experts, Mike Lawrence and Bevan, to get their theories of what's next for the X-Men 97 season finale and beyond. But first, let me tell you why I think we're about to see Marvel adapt a classic early 90s X-Men Avengers crossover comic called Blood Ties. In issue 25 of X-Men Volume 2, we see Magneto cause a magnetic pulse that reverberates around the world, knocking out all power across the globe, just like we saw in the previous episode of X-Men 97. It's also in that same comic that we see Magneto strip Wolverine of his adamantium skeleton again, just like in this episode of X-Men 97. And speaking of, be sure to check out our The Brave Die First shirt up on our merch store right now, ScreenCrushMerch.com, a design inspired by this unforgettable scene. We've got tons of great X-Men inspired designs, Deadpool designs, Star Wars, Planet of the Apes, you name it, we've got it. Go take a look around, I know you'll find something you like. Shopping our merch store is the best way to support our channel so we can keep making videos just like this one. Links are in the description below. Thank you so much for your support. In the comic, Xavier is so enraged at Magneto for what he did to Wolverine that he uses his telepathic powers to completely wipe Magneto's mind, leaving him essentially catatonic. Now, at the end of that comic, we get this teaser text on the bottom of the page that says the story continues in Wolverine number 75 as the X-Men face a stunning loss. And next month, you must read Avengers number 368 before joining us here as Blood Ties, the X-Men Avengers crossover begins. Now, I think the events of Wolverine issue 75 and Avengers 368 could be what's coming next for X-Men 97, and perhaps could even give us a resurrected Avengers United They Stand, a series that takes place in the same universe as X-Men 97. And this could be setting us up for an animated crossover event featuring the Avengers, the X-Men, and even Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. Now, in Wolverine issue 75, we see Wolverine barely recover from his fight with Magneto, and his healing factor has been greatly weakened. It's also in this comic that Wolverine's bone claws were introduced for the first time.
Wolverine Origin Miniseries Issue 2, page 22, Retractable Bone Claws.
Now, at the end of that issue, we see Wolverine decide to leave the X-Men, perhaps setting us up for Wolverine's failure to save his world that we'll learn about in Deadpool and Wolverine.
Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Now, Blood Ties is a direct sequel to Fatal Attractions, another comic that has been heavily borrowed from in this series. And it focuses on a conflict between the humans and the people of Genosha, with the X-Men and the Avengers caught right in the middle. Something that I feel this season of X-Men 97 has been leading toward, with the destruction of Genosha and the Avengers like Captain America refusing to step in and help.
Gotta do this by the book, Rogue. Right now, my hands are tied.
The Blood Ties comic was also done in celebration of both the X-Men and the Avengers' 30th anniversary. Both of these comic book team icons had been around since 1963 and dominated comic racks for those 3 decades. And now, here we are, another 30 years later, and the Avengers and the X-Men are still the most popular superhero teams of all time. Sure, the Justice League probably rivals them in the comic book world, but in the world of movies, it is no contest. Now, X-Men 97 is Marvel Studios' first real take on the X-Men, apart from a few cameos here and there. And for the first time in cinematic history, we're getting to see Marvel's 2 most iconic superhero teams under the same roof, which makes Blood Ties the perfect story to adapt for the X-Men's introduction to the greater Marvel universe. And I just want to say how much I loved this episode. I've enjoyed the whole season, but this episode really had me over the moon, probably because my 2 favorite X-Men characters are Wolverine and Magneto. Now, all throughout the X-Men franchise, we have seen the rivalry between Wolverine and Magneto. Time and time again, we've seen Wolverine charge at Magneto only to be stopped because of his metal skeleton.
Never learn, do you?
And we've always known that Magneto had the ability to rip that metal from Logan's skeleton, but he never did it. There was always this subtle sense of respect that Magneto had for Wolverine and not wanting to harm his own kind. And at times you could even get a hint of respect for Magneto from Wolverine, such as in this scene from Days of Future Past.
You're like me. You're a survivor.
Now, that scene from Future Past immediately came to my mind when watching this episode when Wolverine said,
"The brave always die first."
So in the comics, Professor X wipes Magneto's mind, resulting in all of Magneto's hatred as well as Xavier's own bottled up hate, creating a being within the mind of Charles Xavier known as Onslaught, an evil entity that eventually takes on his own physical form. But I think Charles's partial attempt at wiping Magneto's mind in X-Men 97 may result in Magneto becoming the character of Onslaught, meaning that it could have been the persona of Onslaught who decided it was finally time to rip the adamantium from Wolverine's bones. Now, here in a bit, I'm going to do my thing and tell you guys how I think X-Men 97 has been setting us up for an Avengers and X-Men crossover, perhaps in the live-action MCU. But first, I want to hear from my friends Mike and Bevan and get their theories on what's next for the X-Men 97 season finale, as well as what could come after. So, guys, I just talked about how I think X-Men 97 is setting us up for an adaptation of Blood Ties. That's a classic X-Men and Avengers crossover comic from the 90s that happens right after Magneto strips Wolverine of his adamantium skeleton. In the comics, Professor X is fed up with Magneto and what he did to Wolverine, and it was kind of like a final straw for him. So he basically strips Magneto of his mind in retaliation. Now, a second ago, I explained how in the comics, this created an evil entity known as Onslaught within Xavier's own mind. And now I'm wondering if they are setting us up in X-Men 97 for Onslaught to come on, but instead of the character being within Xavier's mind, perhaps the entity is going to take over Magneto's body instead. So, Bevan, I want to throw that over to you. Do you think we could see the character of Onslaught come into X-Men 97 and instead of taking over Professor X, perhaps take over the physical form of Magneto?
Incorrect. I think we'll go into Sunspot. No, I'm kidding. I just wanted to throw it for a loop. I mean, certainly
Sunslot?
everyone...
It'll be Sunslot?
No, yeah, it'll be Sunslot.
Sunslot, there you go.
Hashtag Sunslot was right. Goes after his parents. Anyways, certainly the entire internet is thinking that's where this is going to go, and it will be an adaptation of Messiah Complex into Avengers versus X-Men and all that stuff. But I've decided I like Mike Lawrence's theory, and we should get Age of Apocalypse instead.
Yeah. I think that it's just... Onslaught sucks. but I will say I will say this and I said this in our last video that you know, it was just a plot device to get Heroes Reborn and Heroes Return and all that stuff, but I do think that I trust if Bo, you know, is around the script, I trust them to do something interesting with it. You know, I would at least like to see where they go with it. I mean, you know, the pacing of the show is insane. That Inferno was one episode,
Yeah.
and there was no demons in it or anything. But
there technically was. It was in the nightmare sequence, but it was not like... Yeah, it was short-lived.
Well, you make a good point that the pacing of the show, it is quick. So I might be off in my prediction here. They may move on to a completely new issue come the finale. So, okay, you guys don't like my idea. You don't think it's Blood Ties. We're not seeing Onslaught. So
well, I just don't know. You know, it's interesting because, I mean, it could be. You know, because you know, we saw Captain America in this, right? And he's clearly different than the MCU Captain America, and it's you know, and it's a more exciting version in some ways that it's its own thing. I don't like movie facsimiles in my cartoons. I like when they're their own thing, and it was fascinating. And you know, he kind of got owned by Rogue in that.
Yeah, he did.
But you know, we didn't see his buddies come like Thor, and you know, so it would be cool. Like you know, it could be interesting, and it really opens up the universe. I mean, just the fact that this already feels more interesting, and with the the worldwide EMP and how it's affected society, I can definitely see the Avengers retaliating in a way.
Is that something that you would rather see? And I pose this question to both of you. Would you rather see that happen like in a season 2, in the finale? Is it something you'd like to see perhaps in like another animated series? Or are you guys like me and you're kind of hoping, and Mike, you kind of just answered this. I'm thinking that it's going to bleed into the live action MCU. I think it has a bigger role in the multiverse saga, perhaps. Bevan, is that something you would want to see? Or are you hoping that whatever happens is something that stays contained within this animated world?
I hope that whatever they do, they stick to MCU Phase 1 techniques over what has been happening. I think people, if you want to call them normies, which I think is kind of insulting, because I think most people are kind of up to date with MCU now, thanks to Disney. But I think it's felt too much like homework for a lot of viewers, and I think the more contained something is with like little sprinkles of connections to the other universe, that's fine. But I think if you put it too much interconnected, I think that's going to hurt the audience for X-Men 97, who's really kind of enjoying that it's drawing more from the comics and less from the MCU.
Yeah, I mean, to her point, the homework thing, I think that is often attributed to newer fans, but it's a thing that burns out the hardcores too. Just even on a monetary level with the comics in the 90s, of what like really made the market crash. It was having to buy everything, and you couldn't just buy Uncanny. You couldn't just buy X-Men. You had to, and then X Factor, and then annuals, and all of this. And once it becomes, and they did the same thing with Spider-Man, where there were 4 titles and every story, had to buy them all. And once you get to that point, and there's nothing that you can just read on its own and enjoy, it pushes everybody away. The lack of self-contained stuff, and so I think keeping this within its thing and having the freedom to do what they want, because the more the problem with the MCU, it has to appeal to so many people. It has to be good for China. It's got to be it's got to do all these other things, the amount of merchandise and toys and all of that. And look, X-Men 97 has toys, but the expectations are so much lower for what it has to do on a marketing level that the quality gets to matter more. So I don't want it mixed up with anything. I want them to just, I like the world that they've built. I like the world that they're playing in, and I want them to just have the freedom to do that, because, the problem becomes, the more masters, the more stuff that is out of your control. And I think a part of why this whole thing has been great is it's probably under the radar. I doubt Feige cares that much about this. And it's probably a big reason why it's so awesome, because it doesn't have to do anything but be a good story. And ultimately, all we ever want is good stories. They made the mistake in thinking that connectivity for the sake of connectivity is what gets people to the theater, and it doesn't. It's just good characters and good stories and good performances. None of this works without Robert Downey Jr. as an anchor in Iron Man. It's, and this is why we see DC, and when they tried to bring back the Mummy, everything with the cinematic universes in themselves are not interesting. Characters are interesting. Stories are interesting.
Yeah.
That's what actually, and to the point where, look, Barbie was a great movie. Barbie was something interesting and different. Now they're going to try to do a Mattelverse and forget what made the thing that was successful in the first place.
Yeah, I wrote about this also on Screen Crush, about why Disney was failing, about characters versus plot, and how Disney properties have become more obsessed with the connectivity and the Easter egg factor of it all over developing really interesting and compelling characters, which is why we really like X-Men X-Men 97, I mentioned this yesterday with Ryan, of like, I want really good characters. I want all the different shades of Jean Grey. I wanted to do it again. It was just right there. I wanted to see Colton's face.
Well, it's right there because you didn't put it away.
I know. I kept it right back out. Look, Sinister made a joke about Jean's jeans. So it's for X-Men 97 talk. But it's true. We care more about interesting characters than the Easter egg factor of it all. The Easter eggs and the connectivity should be the sprinkles on the giant cake of the story and the property, not the overloading of it, because then it makes it less interesting and more about, oh, I guess that connects to that comic book issue number 95, and I guess that kind of connects to this, but if I don't care about what the characters are going through, I'm not going to care about the journey or the Easter egg that's in the background.
Yeah, and you both make a good point that, I mean, that is something that the MCU seemed to understand, like in the Infinity Saga, especially in Phase 1, the importance of character and story, not just connecting for connectivity's sake. And Mike, you make a good point about, like, when I was researching for this video and the blood ties theory, Jesus, there were Wolverine comics and X-Men comics and Avengers comics, and I'm combing through all these different issues trying to piece this story together, and there are multiple comics in between each one. It gets confusing. So I think you both make a good point there.
And that was in a time without digital. So like you had to go to the store, or subscribe.
Right. Yeah.
You either had to have a pull box or get them sent to your house, or you'd have to go to like multiple stores. Well, this place has Avengers 368, but this one but they don't have X-Men 26, so you got to go to this place. And and I remember like I was such a fan of all this stuff, and that's ultimately my favorite comic in the late 90s was called Untold Tales of Spider-Man. And what it basically was it was just single issue stories about, set in like the past. And it was Kurt Busiek, he was an amazing writer. I ended up loving Astro City. I ended up loving, Marvels, these smaller, more self-contained things, Kingdom Come. 4 issues.
Oh, Kingdom Come.
But,
so good.
Things that you could just, pick up. And, even when X-Men was one series, when it was, Claremont Byrne, even before New Mutants and all that, and you could just read a trade and get a thing without having to be so overwhelmed, and, it just ends up burning you out. And it all becomes homework. And people, this is our escape. It's not our lives,
right?
or at least our main jobs. I know for you guys as journalists and stuff, it more so is. But for me, it's like I love this stuff because I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I never want to. I've done the thing where like I'm gonna read every single tie-in of a thing, which is a lot easier to do digitally, and the amount of times you can just see the writer phoning it in, and the amount of writers and artists that end up leaving books because of those mandates.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would assume the reason that they do that is to sell more comics, make people think you've got to buy that, you got to do this, which is something that I think we've seen the MCU do as well, and they used to do it successful. You thought you needed to go see every MCU movie, and that was important. I think now Marvel's learning the hard lesson of people don't care. They're not going to see every Marvel movie. They're not watching every Disney Plus show.
Well, you know what the issue too was that, and I know we got into a much bigger discussion than blood ties, but the TV shows, right? Once you have missable content, once you train an audience that they don't have to see everything, that you can avoid a WandaVision, or you can miss out on Hawkeye, well, then you can miss out on all of it.
Yeah. I knew it was bad when I, as someone who's a really big fan and it's part of my job, when I started feeling like I could skip an episode here or there. That's when I was like, I can only imagine how, someone who just watches it for entertainment purposes would be reacting.
Yeah, it's like I never, I still haven't watched Moon Knight, but you know what? I never wanted to read Moon Knight.
Yeah.
I got Batman. He's better.
Yeah.
Batman, my favorite.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I want to ask you guys. We've talked about, we've shit on Blood Ties. We've talking about the various mistakes they're making. So I want to ask both of you. Ryan tells me you're both X-Men experts. See what I did there? So I want to hear from both of you. What would you like to see happen? And also, sometimes there's a difference between your theory of what's going to happen and also what you'd like to see happen. Sometimes those are the same and sometimes they're different. So, Bevan, I'll throw that over to you. What do you think's coming for the finale and beyond?
Yeah, so I think, first off, I didn't shit on Blood Ties. I said it's probably the theory. No, okay. Well, I said I prefer Age of Apocalypse, because that's what I would like to have happen, but I don't actually think that will happen, but it'd be great if it would. So, talking about so I do think that Blood Ties is something that I think that they will draw from in the second season. If I'm going to go off of what I think will happen in the last episode, well, Beau DeMayo just recently tweeted the cause and effect time loop Star Trek photo screenshot. And so we do know that there is going to be a time loop that will happen in the last episode. And the question is, who causes it and how do they get out of it? And how does that set up for the second season? So, I mean, obviously Bishop is going to take a role in the last episode. We just don't know how. It's probably going to do something with time travel. Is it going to grab from One Man's Worth? Because that also is an Age of Apocalypse inspired thing as well. I think it's a little ironic that Sunspot is up in space and he has the power to absorb solar energy, and what's about to happen to the Earth when the magnetic force runs out is that the sun's going to start beaming down on the Earth. So I do kind of see maybe Sunspot having a change of heart and maybe trying to save the Earth by absorbing some of that. I do think that is a possibility as well. So, again, character arcs. Like, he started off not wanting to be involved, not caring, then went straight to, if you want to call it the dark side of Magneto, even though I know Magneto was right up until a point. I know, Colton, you love that, so I just threw that in there for you. So I think that is a possibility. I do think we might even get a little bit of what happens here in this comic, where Jean Grey will manifest into the White Phoenix. And she could stop everything. Cable killing her could activate the Phoenix Force within her. They have been teeing up that she's been called. She feels the urge of the galaxies calling her, which means that the Phoenix Force is dormant within her. So clearly and they've been teeing that up in the intro. So I do see that happening where she maybe undoes it and starts it over, and she could encourage Scott to live, which is another theme that has been just constantly teased out throughout the season of, like, Scott, you gotta live. Scott, you gotta live your life. You don't have to be part of the X-Men. And she does that in this comic. She encourages him to live, and then he hooks up with Emma Frost, which will happen. She's coming to the Xavier Institute. It's happening. And then my final thing I want to say is I think Bastion will be killed by Death, which will be Gambit, which will tease up the Apocalypse.
Oh, I like that. That's my favorite part.
Boom. I do think we're going to get some Apocalypse. He keeps being shown up in the intro. I do think that Deathbird, I said this yesterday, Deathbird, Gambit, I even think there's Mr. Sinister, obviously. Like, why is Mr. Sinister hanging around? He's been cluing it in that he's been using Bastion to get a hold of more mutants, and I do think maybe Mystique is the fourth horseman that will get teased as well. So there's my spiel. Mike, your turn. What do you got for me?
Beat that.
Beat all of my theories.
Well, I didn't prepare, so she already won. No, I think that what matters the most is, I mean, I just time travel's never been my thing. I want Age of Apocalypse just as like a 2-part or 3-part, like, fun, like, look at all these, outfits. This is kind of cool. And Legion is an interesting character to bring in, that Professor X has a son. But I just, I think what has made this series so great is, the smallness and the characters of it. So, I think that, season 2 is going to be slower. I think we're going to see, Wolverine with the bone claws, but what it means for Logan to be vulnerable, and what his own journey is going to be. I think like in season 2, he's going to be like the older brother was in Malcolm in the Middle, where like 1 week he's in like like a military camp, 1 week he's in Alaska. He's just gonna be like 3 minutes an episode of where Wolverine is as he's like figuring his stuff out. But I don't see him like being like super connected to the team. I think that they're just gonna pick up the pieces. I think Xavier is going to step back, and we're gonna see a very defiant Scott. And I just want them to keep doing what they're doing in terms of like, I like that they have Mojo. I like that they had Ronin. I want to see the big goofy space opera stuff. I want to see the smaller mutant stories. I want to see them just do cool stuff. Have vampires, have the Brood.
With a vampire jubilee in the next season.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Why not? But yeah, I think when they just like flat out like adapt something, it's not as interesting as when they take pieces and all of that.
Yeah.
Like what they've done with Rogue, like if you told me from the first episode, where she was to where she is now, and the 360 journey that she's gone through, and if you ask me, like, I think she's probably been the star of this series.
Oh, I agree.
It's really been about her, and seeing what her journey is, and that they used her instead of Colossus as someone who's joined Magneto, but yeah, seeing her reconcile with the anger that she's had dealing with, dropping Trask, even though he didn't die, the fact that she was capable of that,
Willing to do it, yeah.
Yeah, whatever they do, I just hope they don't lose that. And sometimes when you go so big and so epic, you lose sight of the characters and
arcs.
And because there've been things on here that I love. I really love Storm and Jean's relationship and what they've done with that, and I want to see more of that. So we'll see, and where they can go, I think is endless. It's just how they do it, and if it's done with this much care.
You just gave me a thought. Speaking of character arcs and character development, it could be Rogue that takes away Magneto's powers instead of Charles as a character arc.
Yeah.
And if that happens, I don't think we'll get Onslaught. Because it wouldn't be Charles wiping Magneto's mind. It would be Rogue coming to terms with she cannot go down this path with Eric anymore. And she
just a
stops him.
22-year-old Southern woman with the memories of a Holocaust survivor is its own show.
Yeah, right?
Can she take Magneto's powers?
Yeah, of course she can.
Well, I mean,
Or you say because of the sex thing?
Because of the
right.
field that he has. Maybe he could prevent her, but
if he's weakened,
right?
Yeah.
Maybe he could. Maybe she could. I don't
Maybe,
see why.
or maybe he did get stabbed. Perhaps she wants to try to help heal him, and perhaps in that process it happens. Well,
you
you
just
guys
sticks her hand in his guts like a puppet.
Oh, like a Muppet.
No, puppet. The Muppet is strings.
True.
Oh yeah, the hand is up. They just have to go
sticks
up.
are right up.
Yeah. You're right.
It's a Muppet.
I think you guys have made some very good predictions. Mike, I agree with you 100%. I think that Wolverine is going to be taking on a less active role because in my extensive research for Blood Ties, that is what happens. In that issue of Wolverine, I think it's issue 75, he does end up leaving the team for a while, and he learns about his bone claws. So yeah, I think you're spot on there. And Bevan, with your many fantastic theories, I think one is bound to happen. And I really enjoyed them.
One of those.
And I have an even more crazy one. When you mentioned that there is a, who did you say the tweet was by regarding the time loop?
Oh, Bo DeMeo, the showrunner.
Right. I personally would like X-Men 97. I'm with you guys to be its own thing, be an animated universe that continues to be a separate thing. My nephew, he's 4, and he really likes the show. You know, some of the other like live action stuff, you know, he loses interest in it, but he loves the cartoon. So I would love for them to continue this cartoon, and I fear if they did bring it into the live action MCU, which I kind of think they are, and I'm about to talk about why. I fear that, you know, that gets lost. I'm scared we don't get a season 2 then. We don't get, you know, perhaps the return of, maybe we don't get Spider-Man 98 or Avengers United They Stand. So I'm hoping you guys are right. But now I do want to share with the audience why I think that the X-Men 97 season finale is going to bring the X-Men into the live-action multiverse saga. So guys, I've talked before a time or two about how I think X-Men 97 is going to play a crucial role in the MCU's multiverse saga. I've even been pretty adamant that Deadpool and Wolverine's Wolverine is the exact same Wolverine, or at least a variant of the X-Men 97 Wolverine. A Wolverine who attempts to break that absolute point in time of the massacre on Genosha, and then he is perhaps arrested by the TVA. Now, we've talked a lot these past few weeks about all the clues tying X-Men 97 to the MCU, and there are even recent reports that Kevin Feige considered making this series part of the MCU when they were developing the series. Now, as much as I would love to see X-Men 97 continue as its own standalone series, there's another part of me that gets equally giddy about the idea of this version of the X-Men joining the MCU. And I mean, we're in the freaking multiverse saga, so why not? And here's another question. Why not do both?
What do you mean, do both?
Well, in Loki, we learned all about variant timelines and how they can splinter off, creating whole new realities. Realities that share a common history. So, what if the X-Men we see enter the MCU are actually variant versions of the X-Men from X-Men 97? That'd make it to where we could still borrow everything we love about these versions of the characters and the rich history they have from their animated series and bring all of that into the MCU, giving us an established X-Men for Secret Wars. But at the same time, X-Men 97 could continue with more seasons in its own variant timeline.
Ah, classic. Have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
I love cake.
This would make it to where X-Men 97 can continue as its own thing, but our live-action X-Men that we'll hopefully be getting in Phase 6 of the Multiverse Saga can have a shared history, and we can avoid the need for too much exposition or origin story BS. I mean, come on. At this point, everyone knows the X-Men. Maybe not as well as Batman or Spider-Man, but audiences get the gist. So guys, let us know, what do you hope to see in the X-Men 97 season finale, and what do you hope is the future of this series following the finale? And hey, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Colton Ogburn.